speaker for Bubonicon 51 is a native New Mexican. He is a professional geologist. He happens to have taken a little walk on that orbital body that we call the moon. As a member of Apollo 17, he was one of the last people to walk on the moon. He's also the only professional scientist to visit it until we get back there, possibly. And since his time with NASA, he has been a U.S. Senator from New Mexico for one term. He teaches at one of the universities, I don't know where, what is it? It's going to be a short tweet. But he's a university professor, he's been a space activist, he's done many different things. He's also written a book. So please help me in welcoming to Bubonicon 51, Dr. Harrison Schmitt.
How many of you like to go to the moon one of these days? That's better than usual. How about Mars? Not quite as much as you. I've got a couple of that's always some fun. I'd like to start off though. Let's try to start over. Okay. This is not what you were going to hear. I don't know who started that off. Okay, we're going to start off thinking about Apollo 11 just briefly here. You know, 50 years ago, in July, on the 16th, Apollo 11 launched. And this particular picture was taken 25 seconds after liftoff. It's pretty slow. Pretty slow ride. Saturn V, 7.5 million pounds of thrust at this point. 5 big F1 engines. This actually is a picture that includes the crew of Apollo 11. Buzz Aldrin on the right, Neil Armstrong in front, and Mike Collins acting as Capcom on the left. Yours truly sort of in the middle there watching. And what we're doing is watching the information coming in on the telemetry as the Apollo 8 crew goes through trans-lunar insertion. And believe me, that had our attention. And it had their attention as well. That was, for many of us, the mission, because Apollo 8, because nobody ever expected to fly it. George Low came up with the idea in August of 1968, and we flew in December. And as a matter of fact, during that period of time, from August, or really from November of 1968, to November of 1969, we were launching those Saturn V's every 2 months. I have yet to get NASA's attention on that particular fact. The Apollo 11 had many major accomplishments. I'll just scan through these. Mention the ones that deal with science, in that the primary thing that came from Apollo 11 and then augmented by the other missions was a new and unique knowledge of the first billion years of Earth history. We just did not know what had happened on Earth during that period of time, except for one thing: life began. And I think we're gaining increasing insights now into the conditions under which life began, what the dominant minerals on the earth were. It was an extremely violent time, and maybe before too long, we'll understand all of that. We also provided knowledge of the resources necessary for humans to establish bases and settlements on the moon and ultimately on Mars. The moon has all the resources necessary to do all that. And that is really, I think, underlies any new efforts to go to the moon and to sustain ourselves there, is to use those resources. And one of them in particular could be used here on Earth, and that's the fusion fuel called helium-3, but we won't get into that tonight, probably. There's some questions. Well, this is one of the few pictures of Neil Armstrong. I got a couple of his shadow and things like that. But they only had one camera out. Buzz was using the camera. He finally caught Neil working over at the rock box. And Neil and I spent a lot of time working together through the years. And I asked him once, he says, what prompted you to sample, to get this huge sample of lunar soil? 10084, for those of you who are nerds enough to understand the numbers on the samples. And that's the one that tells us about the resource, told us about the resources of the moon. He said, well, Jack, I collected a whole bunch of rocks and I put them in the rock box and it still looks sort of empty, so I just filled it up with dirt. Neil was the best geologist we sent to the moon. Probably. I'll let you read this. It's one of my favorite cartoons. Try to look inconspicuous. One of these things, those things, picked up your Uncle Rick once, and he was never heard from again. Well, early in July, NASA did some filming at the Rock Lab in Houston, where all the lunar samples and meteorites and things are stored and worked on. And here's yours truly participating in some of that filming, but also Uncle Rick. And one of those things. And also participating with me and joining in the fun down there was astronaut Dr. Jessica Watkins. She's in the new group of astronauts and has a great chance, I think, of being the second geologist on the moon. She's from the Rocky Mountain, Intermountain West here, and I think another Caltech student. So having two Caltech geologists on the moon would be sort of neat. And this is 10084 for you nerds. It is the soil that's been sieved so that you see the very fine portion of it and somewhat coarser part. But just to let you know, for those of you who are into the micron business, half of the lunar soil is less than 100 microns. Really fine stuff, basically dust. But it is also the richest in the resources that we need to sustain ourselves there. So it's an interesting trade-off. Well, the title tonight, as you know, were rock hammers, rock boxes, and core tubes. And before all of this started, for me at least, with the selection of the first group of scientist astronauts that you see here, looking very young, and systematically having crew cuts. Those were the days. Kurt Michael on the left, Owen Garriott, Ed Gibson in the back, Joe Kerwin, and yours truly. Joe was a physician. Kurt was an astrophysicist. And Ed Gibson and Owen Garriott were both engineering physicists. Really quite an interesting group. And the first thing we had to do was become jet pilots. If we hadn't done that, we wouldn't have been in that picture. And then later, helicopter pilots. So it was that was probably some of the greatest experiences of that career, was learning to fly T-38 jets with the Air Force and helicopters in the Navy. Now, to the subject of tonight's talk, the rock hammer. If there's some geologists here in the crowd, you won't exactly recognize that. We had to do some special things. In fact, we had an attachment here so you could make it into a sledgehammer. We never did that, but you could have made a sledgehammer out of it. And this is one of the so-called drive tubes, 70-centimeter drive tube, that became really very, very important, and still is very important to the study of the lunar samples. In fact, it is one of these core tubes from Station 3 on the Apollo 17 mission that is going to be opened, and UNM is sort of leading the effort to examine that sample. It was attempted to keep it pristine in vacuum for 50 years, almost 50 years. And now NASA is releasing that sample along with some others that were frozen and the like, so that new analytical technology can be applied to those studies. And believe me, these samples are the gift that keeps on giving. Not only because we geologists have new ideas about what we want to learn, but also just technology is advanced. And you can do things that you never could before. In fact, about 10 years ago, in one of the samples I brought back, and I'll show you a picture of here in a moment, new techniques found water in those samples, where previous to that we thought the moon was bone dry. And now we know it isn't, and that there is probably a great deal of water deep in the moon as well as in the poles. That's what brought most, not all, but most of these samples back. It was designed to hold about a 10 to the minus 6 torr vacuum. Vacuum of deep space is twice that. So it was pretty good. It was designed and built at the Oak Ridge National Laboratories. They are experts in vacuums because of the nuclear work that they do. And it did serve its purpose very well. Some of them leaked, some of them didn't. But that's the way it is. I tell you, that very fine dust gets on those seals, and it's going to be hard to hold back. Working with that in the Bomb and Comet KC-135, they can do a 1/6G simulation for about 30 seconds. You see me here working with one of those rock boxes, trying to make sure that I knew how to deal with it in 1/6 gravity. And it was different in 1/6 gravity. It was. The hinges, for example, had a memory, and you couldn't close them easily. But we worked that out as well. This is what it looked like when one of them come back. On the right are the Teflon sample bags in which we bagged individual samples. They were numbered, and so the voice transcript would tell them which sample went into which bag, and then they got a new number when they came back to Houston. This big rock here, which is unique in its shape and didn't need a bag, is I'd say about 8 inches long here. So it's a pretty good sized rock. We call them football-sized rocks for the obvious reason. And tried to bring as many of those back as we could. But the tool I used most, for the most part, was this. There's an extension handle, and on the end of it was a scoop. It's just basically a big trowel. And because everything's broken up on the moon, it worked very well as a sample. And we call it the scoop. This is the Gnomon. It is a control on the geometry of the photographs. It gives azimuth with the sun shadow, a scale, a color and grayscale here, and vertical. See the whole vertical, even in 1/6 direction. So that was how we have controlled a lot of the use of the photographs that we took at every sample site. It's called documentation. And of course, the biggest tool we had was the lunar rover. It was a great tool. It carried us 32 kilometers in 3 different excursions on Apollo 17. It also carried a whole bunch of other tools. Here's a rake sampler that we use. Actually, it's a sieve, but we call it the rake. These are explosive charges for the active seismic experiment that we ran. This object here is a special sampler I asked for, called it the rover sampler, so I didn't have to get off the rover in order to get a sample of dirt. And believe me, it has turned out to be a very valuable set of samples. We got a lot 17 launch was a little more spectacular than the Apollo 11 launch because it was at night. It's the only Apollo launch at night. I missed it, of course. But I'm told that it was quite spectacular. And here's a little closer view. And the two spacecraft that would fly to the moon, 2 of 3, and we'll hear about the third one later, is the Challenger here and the America Command and Service Module. They were up here at the very tip top. At this point in the launch, there's a very, very heavy vibration. Drive your pickup down railroad tracks about 30 miles an hour, and you get a feeling for what that's very heavy. Not much speed loading, of course, very slow, but ultimately at 2 hours and 2 minutes and 45 seconds, we were experiencing about 4 Gs. And having that heavy vibration on the first stage only, the 3 stages, and building G levels really gets your attention, but staging gets your attention. When that first stage drops off and the second stage ignites, you go from 4 Gs to -1.5 Gs to +1.5 Gs, and slightly over a second. That gets your attention. You know why they strapped you in? One other thing is that we had a 2-hour and 40-minute delay, which I'm not going to get into tonight, but it gave even more of a chance for frost to build up on the side, the very cold tanks, side of the tanks in these rockets. And here you see some chunks of that ice coming off because of that heavy vibration. So that worked in our favor. We got rid of most of that extra mass that we would have been carrying into the world. Now, we did spend 2 90-minute revolutions of the Earth in orbit, making sure everything was set up for our trip to the moon, the rocket was in good shape and everything. But we also had a chance to see some of the sights. And here over the South Atlantic, this is a cloud pattern. It looks a little bit like an ice pack, so it's a cloud pattern. And I want to call your attention to this blue over here. That's our atmosphere. And remember that when I show you another picture in a few moments. After our trans-lunar insertion burn and shutdown, we turned around in order to extract the Challenger from this little cocoon in the end of the 3rd stage S4B. But we also had a chance to see even more ice particles surrounding the rocket. So we didn't get rid of all of it, but it made quite a sight. This picture, the blue marble picture, which is still, I'm told, the most requested photograph from the Apollo archives, or any archives in NASA. This picture was taken from 34,000 miles away, just after translunar insertion. And it is really, I'm very proud. It is very amazing. You can see, most of the weather patterns are the southern hemisphere weather patterns. Here's Antarctica, here's the Mediterranean. So it's not quite a full Earth, but it's close enough for me. It was part of a series of photographs I took in order to document 3 days of weather observations and forecasts that I tried to make using these very much simplified patterns that you see in the southern hemisphere. Now, Apollo 17 was headed towards the edge of a large lunar basin, 740 kilometers in diameter. That basin is Serenitatis, that's the name that's been given. And we were actually in the ring of mountains that form the basin. And you'll see more of that in a few moments. Relative to Apollo 11, we were north and east of the Apollo 11 site, but in a very, very different geological environment. 3 dimensions, the valley we were in deeper than the Grand Canyon. You'll see that in a moment. But here I want to show you what the far side of the moon looked like to us, the first orbit of the moon, and what's missing. No blue haze on the horizon, right? No blue heavens. The moon's surface vacuum is basically that of deep space. It has a transient atmosphere, but it's being lost continuously. One of the questions we keep dealing with, and I think you know some of the answers, is what is generating that transient atmosphere that's made up of hydrogen and helium and sodium and things like that. So the moon is losing a little bit of its gases, at least it's all of its space. Now that's the Valley of Parsberg. This is about 50 kilometers at distance, but it's only about 7 kilometers there. And our landing point is right there. And at this point, when this picture was taken from the Lunar Module Challenger, Ron Evans, our command module pilot, was taking navigational sightings of some small craters here in the valley, the position of which we knew relative to the center mass of the moon because of a very early robotic mission called Lunar Orbiter, which had been in orbit long enough that we had a general feeling for what the position of various points were relative to the center mass of the moon. And landmark tracking was a navigational technique we used in order to make our landings much more precise. Another picture, this one now taken, a oblique picture taken by the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter robotic spacecraft, which is still in orbit around the moon. It's been there for over 10 years now. And it is taking fantastic images and much other information about the moon during that period of time. And this is an oblique taken of our landing site. Again, we landed right down here. And this is a avalanche deposit. It came off the South Massif. This point up here is 7,000 feet above the valley floor. Really remarkable place. It's hard to get a feeling for scale because there are no familiar objects in any of these pictures. It's just it's a different world, believe me. One of the things that we didn't know until Lunar Orbiter started, Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, LRO, started to take these kind of pictures is that there really were two avalanches. Here's an older one, darker, because of space weathering, and this is the younger one here, lighter. This avalanche occurred about 75 million years ago, and probably in response to faults, what we call thrust faults, along a scarp right here. I'm going to go back one and show you. You can see that line there. That's a fault scarp. The moon is contracting. It's cooling now. It's contracting over geologic time now. And every once in a while it does this. And you get these scarps and wrinkle ridges and things like that across the surface. Now that's another LRO photograph, very high resolution. Actually, the identifying resolution here is down to about 20 centimeters. And the reason I know that is that here's the parallel rover tracks. Each wheel made those tracks. And that's the descent stage of the Challenger that we left there, of course. The lunar rover is parked over here, and it watched our liftoff from the moon. Some of you may have seen that, have seen that on various pictures, even of the last few weeks. And the Apollo scientific experiment package, I deployed out over here. And in a few moments, I'm going to talk a little bit, very briefly, about a drill core that was taken about with that. There. So, because of this LRO camera, we are gaining fantastic new information. In fact, it's been up there long enough now that we can do temporal imaging. That we can find new craters that have formed on the moon since that spacecraft has been in the moon. Well, if you want to explore the moon at least for 3 days, maybe a few more, you need to follow it. You need a place to live, if you can. You need some transportation. It's nice to have transportation. And you need another spacecraft. This is the other spacecraft. It has all the components of a spacecraft. It could survive for 8 or 9 hours, and it also had mobility, maybe yours too. But cooling, we stay cool on the moon besides our personalities. tubes through which we pump cold water. And you couldn't have worked more than half an hour, I think, with gas tubes. You had to have that water put in. It's a major enabling technology, and the whole suit was built by seamstresses at the International Latex Corporation in Dover, Delaware. They just did a remarkable job, they really did. These suits were just really, well, let's see. There you get a little better view of it on the side. They really did a remarkable job. They were stiff, you had to work in them, particularly your forearms got tired working against that pressure in the gloves, but still a remarkable accomplishment. My weight here, with the backpack, and the suit, my own weight, on Earth would have been 370 pounds. On the moon, divided by 6, 61 pounds. So it is easier, much easier to move around than it was in training, and really enjoyable. I found that running with a cross-country skiing stride worked out very well. Remarkably fast. With very little energy expended. But here you see what's happened to that suit after 3 EPAs. It's gotten really dirty. It is still dirty. It's in the Smithsonian. I think, unfortunately, it's being used for a lot of historical research to figure out how in the world did they make these suits. NASA's not very good at keeping archives. But nevertheless, that suit is in the Smithsonian, and it is still dirty. You cannot vacuum that out. 1% of the lunar soil is less than a micron. So, and that just gets into that fabric. So that's one of the challenges in the future is those suits that reject that. And I think we will. Well, lift off from the moon after 75 hours was a fairly, well, it certainly went as we planned. The commander asked me if I'd go outside and get a really good picture of lift off. I had a good sense of the time now. We'll leave that to some future young astronaut, maybe this young lady. She'll take good pictures when she's living with me. Well, rendezvous went very fast. We did a direct rendezvous. We didn't go into orbit, full orbit. We just directed up to meet with Rod Evans, who was in the command module. And we were on our way home. Took 3 more days to get here. The re-entry velocity was about 25,000 miles an hour. But at 10,000 feet, these big parachutes came out and splashed down in the Pacific Ocean near the island of Samoa. Now, this is supposed to be a science talk, so we're going to go through a few more things just to talk about some major scientific conclusions that come from Apollo 17, at least so far. Remember, these samples are still being looked at and will be looked at indefinitely, so we'll learn a lot. There were 2 of the Apollo 17 samples that, based on the textures and the isotopic ratios that we have, I believe, and a few others do too now, came from the deep upper mantle of the moon, as deep as 500 kilometers. Really remarkable time. One's what we call a gunite, 72415, and another one was one of the samples that came in that rake sample. Remember, you saw me using the rake. That 7635535 is a troctolite, that's a hollowy plagioclase rock, and both of them have these textures that indicate that they probably came from the deep mantle. And how did they get there? Well, there was one big impact basin, probably basin formed, probably at about 4.35 billion years ago. That when the moon was still warm and possibly partially liquid still inside, and you had overturn, because the latest portions of the magma ocean, that was the about a 500 kilometer deep ocean of magma that had formed on the moon in its early years, that was the last portions of that fossilized were more dense than the early portions. And so it was gravitationally unstable. And with an impact like that, more likely than not, you did get overturned, brought those samples closer to the surface so that another large crater embryo could distribute them around the moon. And that's what we did. Also, samples from boulders with boulder tracks on them now constrain the large basin ages. That's something we've been trying to do ever since the early days of Apollo, is to understand not only the relative age of these large basins, but the absolute ages. And with being able to follow the tracks of the boulders we sampled up into where their source areas, we now have a fairly good, what we call stratigraphic sequence of big ejecta from these huge basins. That's one of the great contributions I think that we have. And also, the Mare basalt, these basalt rocks, lavas, similar to what we have here in New Mexico, but in the case of many parts of the moon, very rich in titanium. They're what we call vesicular. That is they have holes in them. The gas had to be there to make that hole. That's in a liquid rock. That's the only way you can really get holes. And we don't know for sure what that gas was, but it almost certainly was hydrogen because it's gone now. It's gotten out of the rock. It's had 3.7 billion years to disappear, and that's quite a bit. But it's gone. At least we haven't found it. Now, some people are talking about maybe they can crack open a rock, one of the big samples, and see if that hasn't been done. And that hydrogen probably came from water decomposition, water and ocean. Now, this picture is the orange soil. Some of you remember that I discovered the orange soil, and it turned out to be volcanic ash, and we know the age of it. It was an ash eruption about 3.5 billion years ago. There's a lot of water, a fair amount of water, but there was probably a lot of water involved in that eruption. It's what we call pyroclastic eruption. We have evidence of pyroclastic eruptions all over New Mexico. It's a different kind of eruption, but nevertheless, water plays a role in both of them. And certainly, almost certainly did on the moon. There are other volatiles as well, and all of it suggests that the lower mantle, below about 550 kilometers at least, is primordial. That is, it's made up of the material, mostly the material the moon was originally made of. The early debris of the solar system. So we're learning more and more about that, and all of this is incompatible with the giant impact origin hypothesis that many of you have heard of. I've been one of the skeptics on that for a long time, and I think we're finally finding a great deal of evidence that you're going to have to come up with another hypothesis, and that probably is capture, independent accretion and capture. But it certainly happened elsewhere in the solar system, and it may well have happened in our case. Now we did drill a 3-meter deep core near the outset site, and it has given us depositional history of the regolith. That is this material you see there, and that core's nitrogen isotopic ratios indicate that the sun's luminance, the energy coming from the sun, increased by a factor of 1.7 about 500 million years ago. Well, my solar physicist friends haven't explained that to me yet, but the evidence on the moon is that that happened. But why is that of great interest to us here on Earth? Well, if the solar wind the energy increased to accelerate the maturation of the lunar regolith, and that's what we see. What else happened in space about 500 million years ago? Cambrian explosion. I mean, some of you know about the Cambrian explosion of life and diversity of life. All the major phyla were generated at that time. A remarkable period in Earth history, 500, pretty well dated now, around 540 million years ago. It may be that we're starting to see evidence of what the sun was doing at the time that happened. Warmer Earth. So, Apollo never ends for the scientists. And if you have any questions, I'll be happy to try to answer. Thank you very much.
I saw you referred to some of the rocks as basalts. I was wondering, did all the rocks brought back fit into existing geologic categories, or did you have to invent new ones for some of them?
Oh, geologists always invent new ones. No, the basalts were recognized as basalt, chemically, texturally, and so forth. But most of the light portions of the moon, light-colored portions of the moon, are made up of what we call impact fractures. Some of it has been molten because of the energy of the impacts. Some of it just fragmental. In one instance, Apollo 17, we have this huge area called the Sculptured Hills that is probably a large igneous mass that was ejected from the crater Ingrid, the big basin, 1,000-kilometer diameter basin, that just came over almost as a coherent mass and landed on top of the valley of Charles Schmitt. Didn't destroy it, but it landed there, and there's a lot of evidence of that right now. So, you know, we've had to come up with a lot of new stuff to try to explain the moon. There's a type of rock called creep. That's an acronym for potassium, rare earth elements, and phosphorus. But the big thing with creep is thorium. And that means we can sense it from orbit. And so we know its distribution on the surface. And that sometimes rocks are called creepy. Yes, ma'am.
All of us know the answer to this next question. And I'd like to get your official answer.
Oh, official.
Official answer. A lot of people will say, why are we wasting our time and money on space exploration, going to the moon and going to Mars? What's the value added? What would you tell those people?
Well, it depends on why they ask the question. If they're asking it for scientific reasons, is that we're learning about our Earth by exploring space, particularly the moon and Mars. And it's going to be a little harder to explore Venus, but Mercury we may someday, as long as you stay out of the sun. So that's really the big benefit. If we learn something about the history of the Earth and the history of life on Earth that we never would have received any other way. Nobody could come up with another way. If you're asking it on a political basis, it's geopolitical. It's the United States, as the primary protector of freedom on this planet, needs to be involved wherever the frontier takes us. And right now it's taking us into space, and that happens to match with what I think is in our DNA anyway. From the time human species started to exist, it had to migrate. And I think we're migrating into space now. And we'll just see how that goes. Way back there. Yeah.
What kinds of mechanisms might have caused the extremely fine dust on the moon in vast quantities that
The fine dust is created by micrometeorite impacts. And it's going on all the time. And as a matter of fact, when I was the first orbit I had of the moon, before we went down to the surface, we were in the dark. There was still some Earth light on the surface, but I saw a flash of a meteor hitting the moon. And there's a group at the Marshall Space Flight Center that monitors this now. Whenever the moon is largely dark, they can see these flashes of impacts. And we're also seeing them in the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter temporal studies that I mentioned earlier. So, and those are large enough to give you a flash, and there are many, many more quantitatively that are called micrometeorites that are guarding the surface and really polarizing it all the time. But the primary maturation activity on the moon is probably solar. It's probably the plasma from the sun that is high enough energy to create plasmas on the surface and to actually modify the character of the surface. As I indicated, it looks like it preferentially depletes the surface in nitrogen 14 versus nitrogen 15. Things like that are going on. But the sun is having a tremendous influence, but the dust itself is produced by meteor impact. Way back there.
What were the requirements back then to be selected as one of the men who went on the moon?
Well, for my group, prior to my group, it was entirely selected on the basis of what appeared to be your piloting proficiency. Most of the early astronauts were test pilots, a few were military pilots, but they had been able to convince the selection primarily that they were the best of the best. Okay. Now, with the first scientist group, we had to be not only able to show that we were very proficient scientists, but that we were physically capable of learning to fly jet aircraft. And that, so most of us were 10 years older than when you normally learn to fly jet aircrafts. And so that was a challenge, I'll admit that. But we all made it, and that surprised Eastland as well. I think that may have been initially a way of getting rid of us, to send us to jet pilot school. But we made it, and ultimately all of the group flew on missions, most of them on Skyline. You also had to work very hard. Yes, ma'am.
I want to know what your favorite astronaut movie is.
Favorite astronaut movie? I think the best that's been done that is an attempt at documenting how it was is Apollo 13. Should have had it dedicated. Also, though, there is it's not an astronaut movie, but it's a space movie called Ditch. Australian. Try to find it. It's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun. And the latest, though, this documentary called Apollo 11, which is made, I hope all of you have had a chance to see it. If you haven't, you should. It's made up of the film footage, the archived film footage. I know some of the people that did it. It's just an amazing movie. It's really remarkable. So those three, I think, are very good. Way back.
So just about every single picture has white, black, and some shades of gray in it. However, your picture of volcanic ash has clearly some orange in it. I'd always assumed that most of the pictures being taken were done in black and white because everything there is black and white. Is that an incorrect assumption? Are those pictures all being taken in color, but there's just no color?
We actually had, everybody heard the question? We actually had color film in one camera and black and white film in the other. The commander's camera had color film in it. That's why I'm prominently. People like to create color, even when it's in gray. My camera had black and white. But there was a scientific reason for having black and white. The type of film we had would be well, more valued scientifically because of its photometric properties. But it turns out that a good friend of mine, Ron Wells, retired astronomer, and his son had gotten into working with the color film in order to bring out information that's in the film, but that the printing that NASA had decided to use on those films didn't bring that color out. And that's why you saw that new, it's only a couple of years old that they've been able to produce that orange soil like that. And you probably didn't have time to look at it, but I worked with them a little bit, but they've been able to get the tints, the change of tints across that deposit exactly right, just like I described them on the air to ground transcript, and also the way I remember it. It really is remarkable, the information that's in that color film. It was a new color film for the camera buffs at the time called Ectrochrome 360, and it had never flown before in space. We were the only mission that had it, and it's held up beautifully to 50 years of cold storage. It's now being digitized so that, and I look at the digital images and it has everything that I remember seeing. It's really great. Yes, sir.
Hi. Based on what you've learned about the moon's Apollo program, if you could go back, where would you go and why?
Based on what we've learned, in case you didn't hear the question, where would I recommend they go for science, I presume? And clearly, the far side is the place where we'd like to get more information. We haven't studied much of the moon at all. And there are reasons to think that there's some significant geologic or planetary differences between the near side and far side. And so somewhere on the far side, probably that large basin called South Pole Laken, where the Chinese have recently landed, that would probably be important. Back in my day in thinking about landing sites for Apollo 17, and actually before that, I thought maybe that because we had the information to do it, that Tsiolkovsky, another basin on the far side, was the place to go. We didn't have photography or orbital control of the South Pole Laken, so that was, we knew about it, but we didn't have that kind of control for navigation purposes. But now I think South Pole Laken, but it's going to take a coordinated, multi-mission exploration program to really understand that very complex basin and the materials that are in it. This young lady has a question.
You have a very vivid memory like it just happened.
Do I have a very vivid memory like it just happened yesterday? I do. I really do. Probably because I get to talk about it all the time. And that's a real pleasure, because people seem to be very interested in what we did during Apollo, what the science has taught us and is teaching us, and what we might do in the future. So it's a lot of fun. Okay, yes, sir.
The 3 days you were on the moon, what was it like living in the lab? And how did you sleep?
What was it like living in a limb, and how did we sleep? Well, it was crowded, particularly when you put those 2 suits on. It is very difficult. You go and read the transcripts while we're talking and suiting up, you'll just get the impression that it was very difficult to move around. We had to adjust in order to do certain things. So the suits are very bulky. Sleeping, though, was very comfortable for me. We had hammocks. The commander's hammock was strung fore and aft, and my hammock was strung crossways underneath. But once you're in the hammocks, you're going to rest or sleep or do something because you can't move around during the night. And that's probably one reason why I like young people. No, it's crowded, but I found it very comfortable. 1/6 gravity was very comfortable to sleep in. It is, just enough gravity that you feel like you're lying on something and not enough to make you want to toss and turn. So what more can you ask? I found weightless very comfortable as well. One thing I remember about the first time I was trying to go to sleep in weightlessness on the first day headed towards the moon was that I was just starting to drift off, and I realized I lost perception of where my arms and legs were. They had become so relaxed that they were no longer activating the neural responses. And all I had to do is think about practically moving them and then come back. And then I relaxed and they disappeared. So it took me about a half an hour to get used to turning my arms and legs on and off.
Yes, you repeatedly speak of salt. Are there biodites or any other kind of lavas
Are there lavas?
other than the salt?
Oh, other than basalt, well, you have impact melt lavas. The impacts give enough energy into the rocks to melt them, and some of them act like what we call silicate lavas. They act like they're very slow moving, but they move. You can tell that from the photography that they move. There are some new observations, again based on what Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter has taught us, has shown us, that look like there's some small areas where you have what we call silicic or silicate-rich volcanism. That has got a lot of people very excited. But it's not very much of it. And so I think we have bigger questions right now about the moon and its relationship to the Earth than maybe going to those. But ultimately, I think those need to be explored. Do we have any more kids in the audience? I don't think so. Way back.
The technology that's changed, what are you most excited about for the next generation of space exploration? What new technologies have you most excited about?
Well, I think the most important thing to do right now is get established permanently on the moon, because it is in a sense, a filling station for other space exploration. I think the technology that needs to come about in order particularly to take on Mars and maybe some of the outer planets is fusion technology, and particularly helium-3 fusion technology. Since it doesn't produce it. Well, if you fuse helium-3 with itself, there's no radioactivity produced. You can convert directly to electricity, or you can open it up and use it as a rocket system. It's a nearly perfect interplanetary rocket system based on what we know right now. So that technology, I hope, will start to advance. I'm still working that. That's what my book's all about, by the way. And that's important. But I think the advance of technology since Apollo has just been remarkable. And where Apollo was basically maturing and to some degree creating new technologies that then spread out into the private sector. Now, the challenge for NASA and others involved in the private sector involved in space is to bring technologies far more advanced than that into the space program. So it sort of reverses itself. And so that's the challenge, is to how do you integrate all these technologies into, say, a large Saturn V, a modern Saturn V. How do you do that? Because you certainly would not approach the Saturn V today like we did 60 years ago. The materials have matured, computerized manufacturing has matured. You now have 3D printing, or additive manufacturing that you can use to build components as well as large pieces of these rockets. It's just a different world, and figuring out how to do that and still maintain a relatively low cost is really a challenge. I'd say that's the big technology and management challenge right now. Management challenge is even greater than it was for Apollo because we have to recreate the environment, the management environment that made Apollo so successful. And that's very difficult to do. That's one reason why I showed a little throwaway line there about launching once every 2 months when we were at the height of Apollo. That's not something management can conceive of doing today. So you have to ask yourself the question, what has to change in order for that kind of capability to exist again? I think we've got a lot of time for 1 or 2 more questions. Yes, ma'am.
What's your opinion of the lunar gateway orbiting base compared to a base on or under the surface of the Moon?
Well, I would, with limited resources, I'd concentrate on landing on the moon. Okay. Yes, sir.
So was your the only mission that had a lunar rover?
No, the last 3 flights had rovers, 15, 16, and 17.
So what was going through your mind when you were so far from the ship, and if something went wrong, was there training involved in hopping back to the...
Well, not much was in my mind because I didn't think anything was going to fail. I had ultimate confidence, and in fact, it didn't fail. So I didn't worry about that. I let the people on the ground worry about it. They were watching telemetry that we didn't have, and I figured that if something was going to go wrong, they'd let me know about it. I had other things on my mind, like using that time in the most efficient way that I could. And things that really upset me was when something broke into the efficiency of an operation. Frankly, that did upset me. But if in the very remote possibility that the rover broke down, remember, it had independent drive wheels, it had independent battery buses to 2 sets of battery systems. I mean, it was not, and it didn't weigh enough to get stuck, because you could always get off and lift it out of it. So I had long put any concern I had about going over. But in the remote possibility, I think we could have moved quite efficiently and fairly rapidly back to the lunar module. Not as fast as you could drive. The mission rules that are assumed that we could walk or stride for about I think 2.7 kilometers an hour to get back. The maximum distance we were from the moon was about 9 kilometers. So you figure out, I think, again, and we always had people watching what they call the walk back limit. What were the consumables left in your backpack relative to how far you were from the lunar module based on the number I just gave you. And so if something had happened, you would have headed back. Now, if one of the backpacks had failed, at least the water cooling system, we had what was called a buddy system, that a hose that we carried on the lunar rover that we could connect to the other guy's backpack. And we assumed that then you would drive the rover back, but you would be living off of his backpack. I think you could probably have walked back with that system as well. You just have to match your strides. Now, that would have been difficult because I believe the best and most efficient way to run on the moon and walk on the moon was cross-country skiing technique. And I never was able to convince people of that. All right, how are we doing on time?
Yeah, about
10 minutes? Oh my gosh, wow. Yes, sir.
So coming from a scientific background, sort of socially with the other astronauts, the old guard, the Slaytons and the Shepherds and whatnot, did you kind of find that you had to work a little harder to prove yourself and be accepted by them, or?
Well, there's no question you had to work hard, because you had to get into that culture as much as you could. And if you wanted to get on a mission, you had to make sure that you were as prepared as they were to fly these spaceships. That was the challenge that I had. But on the other hand, once Apollo 11 had landed and the basic geopolitical challenge had been met, then the crews recognized that their contribution would have to be more scientific than just landing on the moon. And so I had a special place in developing their training programs, really putting myself not only in their shoes as a pilot, but also as helping them become as good observers as they could in a geological sense. They start out as good observers, the test pilots certainly. Neil Armstrong, for example, outstanding observer. But they didn't have the background and experience to determine what's important and what isn't. That's why you want professionals that's why you have a professional pilot in the test program, and that's why you want professional doctors and geologists and others when your mission demands it, is that they bring 10 or 15 or 20 years of experience to the game. And that adds a great deal to the mission over what you can train somebody who's not a specialist to do. But on the other hand, any crew that goes into space is going to have to be cross-trained. There's no question, particularly when we go to Mars. That's going to have to be able to do all sorts of different things. And we were cross-trained. We were pilots and we were scientists. Yes, sir.
Let's say we ideally get a permanent lunar base. Do you think you would follow kind of the pattern of ISS for international cooperation with like crews staying on for a year? Or do you think it would be monthly rotations? How do you envision that go?
Well, ultimately, particularly if you're going to produce resources on the moon, I think you're going to have basically a company town. And I'm not sure the government should run that town, but there certainly will be some regulatory activity from the government. Company towns have a long history of both good and bad, but a long history of essentially working to produce resources here on this planet. I think we've learned a lot about how to do that in different ways, but nevertheless, that's sort of what I'm thinking, is that and ultimately, I think you'll have settlers. It's a lot less expensive to go there and live than it is to go there and come back. And so that will be one of the cost parameters that will be looked at. I think when you're dealing with a resource-based economy, now to get there, how do you get there? Well, I think the private sector is looking at that very hard now. I think the NASA is looking at how do you establish an infrastructure that can maybe support that kind of thing for more commercial activity. So there's a lot of things that have to be worked out. I'll be very honest with you, I'm not sure the International Space Station is a good model. Very inefficient, very hard to make decisions, although they worked it out much better than I thought they would. Frankly, impressed with what they're able to do now to operate the International Space Station, but it took far longer to come about than it should have. And that was because of the difficulty in getting international organizations, if you will, to work together. Somebody has to be in charge in space. I mean, somebody has to be able to make a decision and make it quickly, and with a great deal of knowledge. And that's very difficult to do with an international organization. Yes?
I just wondered about with the recent crash on the moon, our taking of biology into space, microorganisms. How is that affecting? I mean, we're going to have an international group of people sending up rockets.
Well, that's a good question. But there is the Outer Space Treaty in 1967 does establish protocols that should have been followed. Whether they were or not, I don't know. I'm not knowledgeable about it. First blush, it sounds like maybe they weren't. But any signatory to that treaty is supposed to be following those, what they call astrobiology protocols. Now, the moon is not nearly as critical an issue as Mars will be. The moon is an extraordinary hostile place for any life form that we might even recognize and or even take there. So probably no harm, no foul on that, but it is something that, believe me, there's a group, a large number of people who are very much concerned about it. And I think the thing you have to worry about is that they will get so concerned that you won't go to Mars. And that would bother me. The Mars environment is very hostile at the surface. I doubt if anything would survive at the surface if it was released. However, there is a geologically stable horizon at depth where the temperature it's the interface between ice and water at depth. That has been geologically stable for a long, long time. And if Mars followed the same pattern early on as the Earth did to evolve complex life forms, or at least complex molecular forms, then that's where I would expect it to have survived. So drilling on Mars is going to be something that has to be thought about very carefully. I think it can be done, even if you cannot safely. But if you're looking for extant life forms on Mars, that's where I think you would look.
And if we take ours,
The release on Mars won't survive. I just don't see it. It's not quite as hostile as the moon, but boy, it's hostile. The atmospheric pressure is 1/100th of the Earth's pressure. You still get a significant radiation environment at the surface. You don't get the micrometeorites at the surface of Mars. But those other factors make it a very hostile place. And Mars is not stable as a planet. We're stable in large part because we have a moon. If we didn't have a moon, we'd be rocking back and forth as Mars does. So, and from a geological point of view, long-term point of view, you want a stable planet in order for life to prosper. But we'll just, I just hope that we have a chance to go see it. Ladies and gentlemen, I have 5 minutes up, but it's red. I think that